Good evening, welcome to APTN National News Weekend. I'm Dennis Ward. We begin in Nova Scotia, where Mi'kmaq were once again the target of violence by non-Indigenous commercial fishermen. Tuesday, several dozen surrounded two lobster storage facilities, while Mi'kmaq fishermen were barricaded inside. Angel Moore reports.
When Brendan Maloney of Atikamekw First Nation tried to drive to this lobster storage facility, he came across about 200 people blocking the entrance. Maloney posted this video on Facebook criticizing the RCMP's lack of intervention.
You guys might as well take your badges off and join them.
As darkness set in, a van was set on fire and the crowd soon dispersed. The storage facility, known as a pound, is the buyer of Atikamekw First Nation's lobster. Meanwhile, about an hour away, people surrounded another lobster pound. Mi'kmaq lobster harvester Jason Marr was trapped inside. He live-streamed it on Facebook.
There's hundreds of them and the cops are with them saying I should leave and let them take my lobsters. I told them I'm not leaving until I leave with my lobsters.
Police can be seen standing by as crates of lobster are removed. Marr said about 3,000 pounds of lobster was destroyed. Jolene Marr, Jason's sister, confronted the police.
Your law! And you're not upholding it!
The RCMP say they are investigating several incidences of threats, mischief, and damage to property. The Atikamekw First Nation launched their moderate livelihood fishery last month that has met with consistent backlash from commercial fishermen, despite the fact that the Supreme Court upheld the Mi'kmaq treaty right to hunt, fish, and gather to earn a moderate livelihood. Chief Mike Sack spoke with media.
Last night, anything could happen to anyone. Like, people could have died last night, which is somebody's going to be held accountable, and we'll be taking further action.
The fear is that as Mi'kmaq continue to enforce their treaty rights, incidents like this will only continue. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Halifax.
After a month of violence from commercial fishermen and what he says is a lack of police response, a Mi'kmaq chief is taking legal action to protect his First Nations moderate livelihood fishery. Here again is Angel Moore.
Chief Mike Sack of Atikamekw First Nation was assaulted at a confrontation at the new Edinburgh Pound. The violence continued into the night. Commercial fishermen blocked the road leading into the lobster pound, surrounding Atikamekw community members. Commercial fishermen are against the Mi'kmaq moderate livelihood fishery. They say Atikamekw moderate livelihood fishery threatens the lobster stock.
They're all walking around believing that they can do whatever they want and get away with it and take the law into their own hands. And I'm starting to believe that's true.
RCMP were on site, intervening during confrontations. Chief Mike Sack said the lack of police response is systemic racism.
Yesterday I had a lot of conversation with the RCMP. I woke up today with zero respect for them. They're not here to protect their people.
Atikamekw First Nation will be seeking legal actions against anyone who interferes with their right to fish. Meanwhile, for the first time in days, it is quiet at the pound for now. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Digby, Nova Scotia.
What was supposed to be an update on COVID-19 in Indigenous communities on Thursday ended up being about much more. For Indigenous Services Minister Mark Miller, Jamie Patrick-Gumscum explains.
The Indigenous Services Minister started the meeting condemning events around the harassment of Mi'kmaq fishermen in Nova Scotia.
These unacceptable acts of violence, including the assault of Chief Sack, threats and intimidation, some racist in nature, cannot and will not fetter the right of the Mi'kmaq people to pursue a moderate livelihood as affirmed close to 25 years ago in the Marshall decision. This is a right that has existed since 1760.
Miller said the negotiations need to be allowed, and it is the police's job to keep the peace during that time. Meanwhile, concerning the pandemic and alarming increases in First Nations communities, Miller mentioned specific outbreaks in York Landing, Little Grand Rapids, and cases stemming from a gathering from the Full Gospel Outreach Centre in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. Despite the arrival of the second wave and 206 active cases in Indigenous communities, both Miller and Indigenous Services Medical Officer Tom Wong agree that Indigenous communities did a great job suppressing the first wave and serves as a good example of what needs to be achieved going forward.
Protect the elders And that's one of the things that First Nations on reserve have been showing the world, that during the first wave, they have been able to protect the elders with no outbreaks, such as in the south. In the north, there's no outbreaks, in nursing homes, in elder lodges, and long-term care facilities. And we need to learn, from the communities. We need to support them.
Miller also announced details of an upcoming meeting Friday to discuss systemic racism in the healthcare system following the shocking death of Joyce Echaquan.
And the purpose of this meeting is for now over 200 people, including some of Canada's top leadership, Canada's top Indigenous leadership, to listen to those that have experienced it on a daily basis.
Miller said he hopes the meeting will be the start of a path forward for Indigenous people living with racism every day. A second meeting is planned for January 2021. Jimmy Pashagumskum, APTN National News, Ottawa.
The Atikamekw Nation in Quebec is calling for public input ahead of drafting a motion they're calling Joyce's Principle. It's inspired by Jordan's Principle, but named after Joyce Echaquan. It's the 37-year-old mother of 7 who died after live streaming the racist taunts of healthcare workers. Echaquan's death triggered 2 coroner's inquiries and a handful of lawsuits. The Atikamekw are hoping for legislative changes to better protect First Nations people seeking care. Meanwhile, they're asking stakeholders to weigh in with thoughts on discrimination in healthcare via email, telephone, or Facebook. Joyce's Principle will be presented at the National Assembly in early November. The Quebec government will ultimately decide whether to adopt its recommendations.
On sait tous que le gouvernement Legault, il se dit que c'est un gouvernement pragmatique, actif. Donc, avec ce principe-là, on lui propose un moyen efficace pour apporter des changements réels.
Coming up after the break, we'll take you to one of the most beautiful parks in the NWT. And then we'll look at how the tourism industry in the Yukon has been hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic.
The minute they announced that all the borders are going to be closed, we had cancellation after cancellation after cancellation.
Welcome back. Nations in northern BC have reported low salmon runs from the Fraser River in recent years, and this was one of the worst. To increase salmon stocks, Takla Nation north of Prince George built a fish hatchery to try to get the salmon numbers up. Lee Wilson has that story.
Takla Nation fishery manager Keith West is meeting with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans as they get prepared to release juvenile salmon into creeks. They are hoping to increase the number of salmon after 20 years of declining returns. These salmon come from a DFO hatchery hundreds of kilometers away. But next year, West hopes the salmon will come from a local hatchery the nation now owns. According to the nation, this year, 14,000 fish were expected to make the run up the Fraser River, but only a few dozen made it. A decline in the fish that was in abundance when Takla Chief John French was young.
We had tons and tons of fish here, but now we're, in 2019, DFO counts in the last 2 years, only 84 early Stewart runs were counted in 2019 and 27 were counted this year.
The Fraser River has 2 salmon runs, the early Stewart run and the late Stewart run. Both can be treacherous for salmon.
So the early Stewarts enter the Fraser River first, and they have a long migration up to Takla here in our territory where they come and spawn. It's probably close to 1,200 kilometer swim for them. So they face challenges all along the way.
There is a large list of potential decline causes: overharvesting, global warming, logging. But one that is adding to the problem, the Big Bar landslide from 2018.
There are history up here. There's been a couple of slides. There's another one back in previous years, and this last couple of years, the Big Bar landslide has affected them.
Chief French says these salmon have been historically important to the area.
We get salmon here. It's protein straight to the people. But furthermore, it also creates the whole, fertilization for the whole ecosystem.
West says leadership in the Takla Nation decided to purchase and run their fish hatchery as a pilot project. If they are successful in raising the salmon, they will have a release in the spring of next year.
Everybody is in the north here is working hard to try to recover the stock. It's we're not necessarily trying to recover it to commercial stage, but just for biodiversity, and we actually need them salmon. The land needs them salmon up here.
Takla Nation is also working with the Upper Fraser Conservation Alliance, a network of 30 First Nations trying to regain a sustainable fishery on the Fraser River, BC's largest river system. They hope these steps will turn things around for the salmon populations in northern BC.
Really good collaboration that's starting to make a difference up here in the north, and a lot of people are really happy about what we're doing, and I think it's a really good thing.
Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Takla Lake.
It's been a devastating year for tourism in the Yukon this summer. With access to the territory limited, its second biggest industry is struggling to adjust to a pandemic world. Indigenous tourism operators have been spared and have not been spared, and many have had to put their business on pause for the rest of the year. But despite the uncertainty, some are holding out hope that better days are coming. Here's Sarah Connors.
Fishwheel Charters is closing up for the season. By now, the Indigenous boat tour in Dawson City should have seen as many as 800 tourists. But thanks to COVID-19, tour operator Don Kassoon says this year has been unlike any other.
I would call it disastrous.
Kassoon and her partner, Tommy Taylor, are feeling the effect of border closures and have lost 75% of their revenue.
The minute they announced that all the borders are going to be closed, we had cancellation after cancellation after cancellation, that we have people pre-book at two years ahead. This year we had 15 people.
Maybe half a mile in, and that's where I take the tourists and that.
James Allen is the former chief of Champagne and Ajax First Nation. He now operates Shakatun Wilderness Camp with his wife in Hangs Junction. He says they'd receive up to 50 visitors from all over the world each year, but not this year.
Well, I haven't seen any tourists, actually.
For a fairly new business still trying to get off the ground, Allen says navigating through the pandemic has been challenging.
Starting off a business is pretty shaky, especially out here. We're not in the mainstream, and people have to drive out to my place, and it's hard to find.
Harmony Hunter is a tourism officer for Yukon First Nations Tourism and Culture. Though no Indigenous businesses have officially closed, she says this past season has been unprecedented.
Some businesses are taking a pause, and so they've shut down operations for the summer, but are planning taking a minute. They're out on the land, they're being with their families.
And it's not just the Yukon that was hit hard by COVID-19. 32,000 Indigenous tourism employees lost their job this year, and 1,140 Indigenous tourism businesses closed. And the expected GDP loss for this year in this industry is $1.4 billion. In spite of the economic hardships, for some operators like Allen, the pandemic has been a time to build much-needed infrastructure.
We have the camp all electrified right now, so that this COVID-19 has given us a break to be able to do those things.
Both tour companies have received government and territorial grants to keep them afloat, like the $25,000 non-repayable development stimulus grant for Indigenous businesses. Don Kassoon says these grants have been a lifesaver.
Even if little grants here and there, help us survive, help us pay for our insurance so then we can continue running the boat tour, every little dollar helps. We're not looking for a handout, but we're looking for a hand up.
And while it's too early to say what next year will look like, James Allen says he's willing to play the hand that he's dealt.
My philosophy is whatever is dealt, I play the cards. I don't worry too much because I'm past that stage anyhow in life.
Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
It's one of the Northwest Territories' most breathtaking national parks. But community members of Nahanni Butte, which is located just beside Nahanni Park, say they aren't always reaping the benefits of the protected area. Charlotte Moore Jacobs has more.
Nahanni National Park Reserve. Dramatic landscapes with rushing rivers unfolding into ancient valleys that rise to remote peaks. A habitat for many animals and home to the Naha Dene. Nahanni Butte, the closest community to the park, just behind Teneko, a sacred mountain which lies at the base of the National Reserve, a cornerstone for Dene knowledge.
But the story was Yamoria came and he put hole in there to scare the beavers out of that home.
In 1972, the area was designated a national park. Locals advocated for the protection against hydroelectric development.
My dad, my uncle, my grandfather, and that they really keep the land clean, everything clean. That's why they put the Nahanni National Park in, because they wanted a beautiful country there, and they said that Virginia Falls, they're going to use it for the power and stuff like that.
It was an exciting time.
Well, when the park was formed, back in the 70s, Pierre Trudeau came here and spoke to our elders. And sadly, it wasn't documented or put on paper. They were promised training, job, a lot of opportunities.
Jane Conoscenta worked at the park until a landslide in 1988 saw the park's headquarters move from Nahanni Butte, something she says was only supposed to be temporary. But since then, tourists who wish to go to the park leave by charter flights from Fort Simpson, a 3-hour drive east of Nahanni Butte.
They just bypass the community. They stop in Fort Simpson, they do all their shopping or gifts, buying gifts, stay at a hotel and spend money there, but nothing here.
Parks Canada says that many plans have been in the works to bring an office back to Nahanni Butte since 2009 when the National Reserve was expanded.
This office would be in place to house the positions that we do have in Nahanni Butte, as well as serve as a bit of an interpretive center for tourists that are ending their trips down the South Nahanni River.
While there's no set date for when a new office or new park positions will go up, elders will be there to welcome visitors and share their stories when it does.
It's a beautiful place to live. I said, even when I was younger, I said I would never move away. This is my home, and I'm going to stay here and build upon it and make things better for us.
Charlotte Moore Jacobs, APTN National News, Nahanni Butte.
Time for another quick break, but coming up, getting back to the basics. Jewelry made from antler.
For me, it's like having the spirit of the deer or the moose, you know, like live on, instead of just sitting in a cabin somewhere.
Welcome back. Animal antlers can serve many purposes. They can be used as food. They can also be used for art or jewelry. One Métis artist is making a name for herself doing the latter. And as Brittany Hobson shows us, it started with a decades-old piece of history.
It takes a steady hand and plenty of concentration to cut through this antler. Skills Candace Lipashuk has honed during her years of practice. The Métis artist specializes in antler carving.
It's a very hard material. I break a lot of blades because they're really small. My bits get dull. So it's not like working with wood. It's a lot harder than that.
Lipashuk is one half of Fat Dog, an antler jewelry company she started with her dad. The name is shorthand for father-daughter. It started 5 years ago with a family heirloom.
He had kept a set of moose antlers for over 40 years, and he just decided to make a pair of earrings for me one day, a pair of feather earrings. And I got some compliments on them, and I already worked with wood, and I loved working with my hands, so I asked him to show me how it was done, and it became a passion after that.
Lipashuk uses deer, caribou, elk, and moose antlers to create intricate pieces like this feather.
So now what I'll do is I'll keep beveling out the rest, like that, and give the feather line some details.
Sometimes she's gifted materials to work with, such as these muskox antlers. This tree pendant is a product of those. Lipashuk says making jewelry connects her to something larger. With each piece comes a story.
For me, it's like having the spirit of the deer or the moose, like live on, instead of just sitting in a cabin somewhere. Like, we're not the type of people that hunt for trophies. We're the type of people that hunt for the food. We need to nourish ourselves, and it's our culture, and that's the way we are. So to use every part of the animal is hugely important.
Lipashuk relies on markets and workshops to sell her goods, things that have been canceled in light of the pandemic. She says it's been tough losing out on face-to-face contact. Those moments are more than just business. They are opportunities to share and educate.
I've had a lot of comments like, wow, they're light, or it feels good, and I think maybe that's what it is. It's feel-good pieces, and, it being organic and part of earth, that people have that grounding, without even realizing it.
Pandemic aside, the past 7 months haven't been wasted. Lipashuk finished building her studio and has tapped into another creative endeavor, working with tin found on her property to create these multimedia pieces. Brittany Hobson, APTN National News, de Salaberry.
Some very cool work. And that is all the time we have for your APTN National News Weekend. For more, visit our website, aptnnews.ca, and never miss a story by downloading the APTN News app. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.